On a cold, grey afternoon in early November, Robert Mills stepped out of his luxury SUV, the kind that turned heads in most neighborhoods except this one. The bitter wind whipped down the narrow streets of South Philadelphia, tugging at his expensive wool coat. He pulled the collar up higher and looked around. The row homes here had seen better days. Brick facades chipped from years of neglect, windows fogged with condensation, and old plastic chairs stacked on tiny porches told stories of people just getting by. He checked his watch, 3:47 p.m. This wouldn't take long. Robert wasn't usually the type to make these visits himself. He had property managers for that. But something about this particular case apartment to see, 3 months behind on rent, made him want to handle it personally. Maybe it was the quiet defiance in the last email the tenant had sent. Or maybe it was just the kind of day where he felt like reminding someone who held the keys. He walked up the cracked steps of the building and pushed open the weather-worn front door. The smell of old carpet and fried food lingered in the air. Inside, the hallway was dim and quiet, except for the buzz of a single flickering ceiling light. As he climbed the narrow staircase, he rehearsed his lines. Be firm, be fair, don't get personal. Second floor, apartment C. He knocked. No answer. He waited, knocked again, this time more sharply. Then the door opened, just a crack. A young girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, peeked out. Her face was pale, her light brown hair pulled back into a frayed ponytail. She wore a hand-knit sweater that was clearly too big for her, sleeves rolled up past her small hands. "Hi," she said quietly. "Is your mum home?" Robert asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. The girl hesitated. "She's at work, but I can call her if you want. I'm Emma." Robert nodded, caught off guard by her politeness. He expected slammed doors, excuses, or even angry words. Not this. "Okay," he said, then added, "Mind if I step in while you call her?" Emma didn't move for a second, then opened the door wider and let him in. "Sure, it's cold out there." Robert stepped inside, already bracing himself for what he usually saw in delinquent eunuchs' mess. Neglect, tension hanging in the air like smoke. But this wasn't that. The small apartment was warm, if a little worn down. The floors were swept, the furniture mismatched but clean. On the windowsill sat a collection of tiny potted plants, some sprouting little green shoots, others clearly tended to with care. On the kitchen table sat an old sewing machine and a neat pile of fabric, scraps, buttons, threads, and half-stitched clothes. Next to it were tiny dresses and shirts, doll-sized but intricately made. "You sew?" Robert asked, before he even realized the words left his mouth. Emma nodded proudly. "I help my mom. She makes doll clothes for people online. I help after school. We don't watch much TV." Robert looked around again, slower this time. Everything was modest, nothing expensive. But it was cared for, that was the word. Loved, even. "Your mum does all this?" "Yeah, she works part-time at a bakery, but at night she sews. I do the buttons and sometimes pack the orders." Robert didn't say anything. He'd come here expecting excuses. Instead, he was looking at a child who worked harder than some adults he knew. Emma looked at him curiously. "Are you here for the rent?" He hesitated. "I am. I'm Robert Mills. I own the building." Emma nodded, like that wasn't as scary to her as it should have been. "Mum said you might come. She's really trying, you know?" Something in Robert's chest tightened. He didn't like feelings. Feelings made things messy. He preferred numbers, contracts, balances. They made sense. Emma turned to the small counter and picked up a phone. "I'll call her, she'll come quick." As Emma spoke quietly into the phone, Robert looked at the walls. Drawings, some of them childish, clearly Emma's, some more detailed patterns for dresses. A hand-drawn calendar was pinned up with order due dates and mum work schedule. Written in different colored pens, he didn't hear much of the phone call, but a few words floated to him. "He's not mad." "No, he's nice." "Okay, I'll tell him." Emma turned back to him. "She'll be here soon. Maybe 20 minutes. Robert nodded. "That's fine. They stood there in silence for a bit, awkward but not uncomfortable. Emma broke it. "Do you want tea or something? We have some apple cinnamon. It's not real apples, but it smells nice." Robert blinked. Sure. He wasn't sure why he said that, but something about the way she offered it, as if she had grown up offering comfort to tired adults, made it impossible to say no. She moved around the small kitchen confidently, filling a dented kettle with water, setting it on the stove, and rummaging through a drawer for 2 mugs. One had a chip on the rim and said "Best Mum Ever." The other was plain blue. "You live here with just your mum?" Robert asked, more softly now. Emma nodded. "Since I was 4, she left my dad 'cause he was not nice. We've been okay though." Again, that quiet pride. Not desperation, not begging, just life. Robert stared at the sewing machine, the little stack of dresses beside it. "You sell those?" "Sometimes, not always. Some people cancel. Mum gets sad when that happens, but we always try again." When the tea was ready, Emma poured it carefully and handed him the blue mug. It smelled like cinnamon and something else he couldn't name, but it warmed his hands. They sat at the table, silent again. The wind howled outside, and the radiator clanged, but inside the apartment, the world felt strangely peaceful. The front door creaked open 20 minutes later. Robert stood as a woman walked in, cheeks red from the wind, scarf half falling off her neck. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw him, but she didn't flinch. "Mr. Mills?" she asked, brushing snowflakes from her coat. "I'm Carol Hansen. Sorry for the delay, the bus was late." Robert nodded slowly. For a moment, he didn't speak, because something in his face had changed the moment she entered. He didn't know her, not really, but there was something about her. Her tired eyes, the way she looked at Emma first, before looking back at him. The strength in her shoulders, despite everything. It struck him. He had come here to discuss overdue rent. He had come prepared to be firm, to maybe even start eviction. But now he couldn't remember a single line of the speech he had practiced on the way here, because in this small, humble apartment, something had shifted. In him? Around him, Carol walked over and set her worn-out bag on the counter, glancing at her daughter, and then at the tea mug in Robert's hand. "I know we're late," she said, calm but apologetic. "I'm trying to catch up. I really am. I picked up more shifts and I've been sewing orders late into the night. I can give you something next week, maybe half. The full month by the end of the month." Robert still didn't speak. He just stared at her, because now that she was here, he finally saw what Emma had shown him quietly all along. This wasn't just another tenant. This was a mother doing everything she could to keep a roof over their heads. A child who worked beside her without complaint. A home made out of almost nothing but heart. And then, something strange happened. His hand loosened around the tea mug. His jaw unclenched. But the rest of him froze. Because standing there, Robert Mills, real estate tycoon, millionaire man, who once prided himself on being completely unshakable, realized he couldn't go through with it. He had come to collect, to deliver consequences, but all he could do was stand still, unable to speak, while a little girl looked up at him with eyes full of trust. And a mother tried not to crumble from exhaustion. And just as Carol stepped forward to offer him a crumpled envelope from her bag, something inside Robert's chest cracked. Something that had been buried for a long time, and in that moment, everything changed. But what he did next will surprise you, and it wasn't in any lease agreement, not in any eviction notice, not in any business plan. It was something human, something real, and something he hadn't done in a very long time. Want to know what happened next? Then stay with us, because the real story is just beginning. Robert didn't take the envelope. He couldn't. His fingers twitched by his side, but he stood there, eyes fixed on Carol as she held it out, expecting him to respond like any landlord would, cold, calculated, professional. But something about the way she looked at him, tired but unashamed, strong but clearly worn down, made it impossible. Carol slowly lowered her hand, misreading his silence. "It's not much, I know. But it's something. I don't expect you to forget the rest. I'm just asking for a little more time. Her voice was steady, but it carried the weight of someone who'd had to say those words too many times to too many people. Robert finally cleared his throat. Can we sit? He asked, gesturing toward the kitchen table where his half-full mug of cinnamon tea still sat. Carol blinked, confused, then nodded and pulled out a chair. Emma watched silently from the doorway, her hands clutching the sides of her sweater. I don't usually make these visits, Robert began, lowering himself slowly into the chair. I have a team that handles late payments. I sign off. That's all. Carol nodded politely, unsure where this was going. But today, he continued, glancing briefly at Emma, I wanted to see things for myself. She waited, her eyes scanning his face for judgment. What I saw, he said, slowly, wasn't what I expected. The room was quiet except for the distant ticking of a wall clock. Carol gave a small, uncertain smile. People expect worse from this neighborhood. It's not the neighborhood, he said. It's the fight in it. In people like you, that surprised her. Her expression softened slightly, but she didn't speak. I grew up in a place like this, Robert said, after a moment. My mum worked nights in a laundromat and days cleaning office buildings. There was a time we didn't know if we'd keep our apartment from one month to the next. I haven't thought about that in years. Carol tilted her head. And now you own the buildings. I guess that's the irony, he said. Managing a faint smile, Carol looked down at the envelope in her hands, then slowly slid it back into her bag. I appreciate your honesty, she said, her voice quiet. But I don't want a free pass. I want to pay what we owe. I just need a little more time. Robert nodded. You'll have it, and maybe something else, too. She raised her eyebrows. You're talented, he said. Those doll clothes. They're detailed, clean work. My company has a design branch. We've been looking for someone who can do custom hand fabrication for mock-ups. Just part-time to start, but it pays well, and you'd be working from home. Carol blinked. Are you serious? I wouldn't offer it if I weren't. She leaned back slightly, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything yet. Just think about it. Emma, who had been watching with wide eyes from the hallway, stepped forward slowly. Would that mean Mummy could stop working at the bakery? Robert looked at Carol, giving her a soft smile. Maybe. Carol's eyes welled up just for a second, but she blinked quickly and held them back. Thank you, she whispered. Robert nodded and stood up. I'll have someone drop off the paperwork tomorrow. Take your time. He turned to the door, but paused. And one more thing. That sewing machine, it's too small. I'll arrange something better. Before Carol could protest, he was already stepping into the hallway, the door quietly clicking shut behind him. That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his penthouse apartment overlooking the river, thinking about the chipped mug in Emma's hand, about the tiny stitches on a doll's dress, about his mother's hands, raw from scrubbing floors. He thought about how far he'd come, how far he'd drifted from where he started. Over the next few days, things moved quietly but steadily. A new sewing machine arrived at Carol's apartment in an unmarked box. Carol got a call from a friendly voice at Robert's company, walking her through the first batch of design work. Emma beamed as her mother sat at the kitchen table sketching patterns that would now be part of someone's actual office space. But as things began to improve, a shadow returned. One rainy afternoon, as Carol was ironing out fabric for a mock order, a loud knock shook the front door. Emma jumped up to answer it, expecting maybe another package or a neighbor. Instead, a man in a dark hoodie stood in the hallway. His face was familiar and, not in a good way. Hey, he said. Been a long time. Carol froze at the sound of the voice. She stepped into the doorway quickly, pushing Emma behind her. Jason, she said slowly. What are you doing here? Just checking in, he said, with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Heard you were doing better. Figured maybe I should come by, talk. There's nothing to talk about, she said, her voice firm but shaking. Robert had no idea about Jason. Carol had never told him about the man who had once left her with nothing but a child and a mountain of unpaid bills. Jason had vanished. For years, no calls, no support, no visits. Now, out of nowhere, he was standing at her door like he still had some place in her life. "I'm her father," Jason said, glancing at Emma. "I have rights." Carol stepped forward, her hand gripping the edge of the door. "You lost those rights a long time ago." He didn't flinch. "That's not what the court might say." Carol's stomach turned. She hadn't heard from him in over 6 years, hadn't even thought he knew where they lived. But now, with her finally finding a stable path, he had returned, like a shadow chasing the light. "I think you should leave," she said. "I think you should be careful," he replied, low and cold. That night, she barely slept. Emma curled up beside her, unaware of the full weight her mother carried on her shoulders. Carol didn't tell Robert. Not yet. She didn't want to seem weak. Not when she was finally building something new. But, over the next week, Jason returned. Twice, once during the day when Carol was alone, once at night when she refused to open the door. Then a letter arrived. A folded legal document. Custody review. Carol sat on the couch holding it, her hands trembling. It was like her past had found a way to punish her, just when she dared to dream again. Finally, after the third visit, she called Robert. He answered. On the second ring, "Everything okay?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Can we talk?" In person. An hour later, he was standing in her kitchen again. She handed him the letter, unable to find the words. He read it silently, his face hardening. "You have a lawyer." She shook her head. "I've never needed one. You do now." He looked at Emma, who sat quietly at the table, coloring with worn pencils. Then back at Carol. "I told you, I see more than numbers in a report," he said. "I meant that I'm scared," she admitted. He nodded. "Good. That means you're still fighting." She looked at him, a little surprised. "You're not scared?" "I've been in courtrooms," he said calmly. "He doesn't scare me. And now he'll have to go through me." Carol didn't know what to say. She felt something rising in her chest, something that had nothing to do with money or fear, something warmer. But just as she opened her mouth to speak, there was a sudden, sharp knock on the door again. Robert turned instantly. Stepping in front of her, Carol's heart pounded in her chest. Emma's crayon froze mid-stroke, and outside, in the hallway, a voice called outcome, smug and full of poison. "I know you're in there. We need to settle this now." Robert reached for the door handle, and the entire apartment held its breath. Robert didn't hesitate. He opened the door swiftly, standing tall, his broad frame filling the doorway. Jason stood there, soaked from the light drizzle outside, his hoodie clinging to his arms, his jaw set in a smirk like he was still in control of the situation. But what he didn't expect was to come face to face with someone like Robert. Jason's expression faltered for a split second. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the man who's going to make sure you leave," Robert said calmly, but firmly. "Now." Jason scoffed. "This is none of your business. I'm here to see my daughter." "She's not your daughter, just because you showed up after 6 years," Robert replied, not raising his voice. "You gave up that right the day you walked away, and legally. That paper, you brought it's just a threat, not a decision." Jason stepped forward, but Robert didn't budge. Inside, Carol stood quietly, her heart pounding in her ears. Emma gripped her hand tighter, eyes wide and afraid. But something about seeing Robert stand there unshaken, steady made Carol feel a strength she hadn't felt in a long time. "I'll come back with the police," Jason threatened. "Go ahead," Robert said. "And while you're at it, tell them you've been harassing a woman and a child. I've got video from the hallway cameras, audio too, and a legal team already reviewing everything you've done since you showed up. I'm not just a landlord. I'm someone who doesn't tolerate threats." Jason's smirk cracked again, replaced now by something more uncertain. "You think you can scare me," he muttered. "I don't need to," Robert said. "The law will." For a moment, the only sound was the faint drizzle outside and the slow creak of Jason's shifting feet. Then, without another word, he stepped back. His eyes flicked past Robert, into the apartment, where Carol stood holding Emma. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but didn't. And then he turned and walked down the hallway. Disappearing into the stairwell without a glance back, Robert closed the door gently and turned to face Carol. She looked at him, tears in her eyes, not from fear anymore, but from relief. "I didn't know what to do," she whispered. "You didn't have to," Robert said. "That's what people who care do. They show up." Carol stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" Robert looked at Emma, then back at her. "Because someone once showed up for me, and I never forgot it." The days that followed were different. Carol met with Robert's lawyer, who helped her file for full legal protection against Jason. The court sided with her quickly, especially after reviewing the footage Robert had mentioned. Jason never returned. Robert kept checking in, not just as a property owner but as someone who had grown to deeply. Carol kept working on designs, slowly building confidence and stability she never thought she'd have. Emma even began sketching her own little outfits, and Robert made sure her school received supplies and encouragement quietly, anonymously, the way he preferred. One sunny afternoon, months later, Carol invited Robert over for dinner. Emma had insisted on baking cookies for dessert. The apartment still looked the same in size, but it felt entirely different, warmer, lighter, fuller. As they ate together, laughing over Emma's slightly too crispy cookie bottoms, Robert looked around the room and realized something. He had stepped into their lives thinking he was coming to collect rent. Instead, he had rediscovered something he'd lost along the way: humanity, connection, purpose. This wasn't just another line on a spreadsheet. This was a story, a life, a home, and he had been part of saving it. As the evening drew to a close, and the sky outside turned a deep purple, Robert stood to leave. Emma hugged him around the waist without hesitation. "Thank you for not being scary," she said with a smile. He chuckled. "Thank you for the tea." Carol walked him to the door, the two of them standing in a quiet moment. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said. "But you did." He looked at her and nodded slowly. "Sometimes life gives us a chance to be more than who we were yesterday. I'm just glad I didn't miss mine." As he stepped into the cool night air and walked toward his SUV, he didn't feel the wind cut through him like it had before. For the first time in a long time, he felt warm because, this time, he hadn't just fixed a financial issue, he had changed a life, maybe even two, and in doing that, maybe he had changed his own. So next time someone says the rich don't care, tell them this story. Because sometimes, even a millionaire needs a reminder that the most valuable thing you can ever own is a heart that remembers where it came from.